allowed to begin collecting fees so that it could repay the debt it incurred on upgrading the roads. Some say that this upgrade was desperately needed, but the public still object to paying for roads that they have used for free in the past. The opposition to Urban Tolling Alliance took the system to court many times, and the constitutionality of e-tolling will today again be tested in the court after the Freedom Front Plus made a last-ditch attempt to stop the system from going live. OUTA threw in the towel, in the legal ring at least last month, but will continue their campaign with legal and support services offered to motorists who refuse to register for e-tolls. Last week, we spoke to Dr. Roelof Botha, an economist from Price Waterhouse Coopers, who believes e-tolling is indeed the best option for South Africa. Let's just look back at what he said.
This is a classic example of people not being able to see the wood for the trees, because we should concentrate on the roads and think about what it was before these roads were improved. We got almost 600 kilometers of additional freeway lanes. 34 interchanges were upgraded. 47 new bridges were built. Lighting was provided for 186 kilometers. And the fundamental flaw of the argument against e-tolling, and this is terribly important because this just obviates the need for a debate, is that if Sanral were not able to prove that it had a funding mechanism, user charge principle on these roads, it would not have been able to secure the credit rating and the loan required to build it.
Dr. Roelof Botha speaking on e-tolling last week. Today in studio, well, we're supposed to have Wayne Divenage from OUTA. He said he'll be a little bit late and hopefully he can still join us. But Andrew Marsay, a transport consultant, is with us this morning. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Evan. Morning, everybody.
I'd like to ask you what you think of what Dr. Roelof Botha said in that clip. It makes the point that e-tolling makes sense and that we'll be happy with e-tolling's benefits in 10 years' time.
Well, I agree with Roelof, but he's talking from the point of view of a funding mechanism. But I'd like to bring another perspective completely on tolling, and that's to do with national transport policy.
Yeah.
We tend to think of tolling simply as a financial mechanism because it's more efficient. In fact, on this matter, I agree with Wayne Duvenage. It's not necessarily the most efficient method of funding the roads. But national transport policy doesn't focus only on road users. Less than 20% of Gauteng households have cars. National transport policy tries to strike a balance between the economic efficiency on behalf of the road users, who are important, and social equity, which is the other 80% of Gauteng households for whom public transport is vital. Now, by funding the roads through tolls, we're actually making it easier to fund public transport, and we're making it easier for existing investments in public transport to take root and succeed.
Well, Andrew, Wayne Divenage has just joined us. Wayne, if you can come in and join us here, we just started the discussion. I'm sure it's a question of Monday morning traffic for Wayne this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a seat.
Pleasure, thank you.
Andrew, well, we started the discussion around the benefits outside of just the payment structures, and Andrew made the point about how e-tolling will benefit public transport in South Africa and that kind of infrastructure. What's your opinion on that?
Well, what we believe is that there's a massive need for integrated public transport systems. And what has happened is in the absence of a meaningful public engagement process, which took place, I'll give you an example where it works well, in the London inner city surcharge process. The mayor did a fantastic job in bringing society on board. They had to put on extra 300 bus routes, park and rides and so forth. This was completely negated through this process due to this meaningless public engagement process where only 30 people responded. There's 3.5 million motorists in Gauteng. So we never had any say in holding Sanral accountable to what has actually happened here. So what we have is we now know there was collusion. The roads have cost us a lot more than they should have. The park and ride systems, the public transport systems aren't there, the alternatives aren't there. And so you have resentment by society. And tolling of this nature failed. So where it works well because public buy-in. If you don't have the commitment here from the heart, and the people buying in, the system fails.
What do you say to the economists? And Dr. Roelof Botha was with us last week. He's an economist who consults with Price Waterhouse Coopers, and he says he's done a snap survey amongst about 60 economists, and more than 80% have believed that e-tolling will be a massive benefit for South Africa, and we'll look back at it in 10 years' time and be very happy with what happened in Gauteng.
Yeah, but you know, that's his one-sided view. Then you
No,
speak
it's not just one economist. It's 80% of
but
60
that's
economists.
his view that there's 80%. Have you spoken to Chris Hart? Have you spoken to Azad Jamin? Have you spoken to all of those economists? They deny that statement. So, you know, you can't introduce a system that costs you over R1 billion a year to administer before a rand goes into the tarmac. International standards are between 5 and 10% of costs go to the administration. In this case here, you have well, it's actually 30%. Sanral says 17%, but they leave out the violations processing process. I mean, this is massive cost to society. Here's the simple response to that. 9 cents to the fuel levy in 2006 to today would have already paid for the capital costs.
What do you say to that, the fuel levy, and would that be fair to the rest of the country to pay for the roads in Gauteng?
It would be more economically efficient, and I agree with Wayne on that. But economic efficiency is not the only consideration of national transport policy. Social equity is as well. Funding via the fuel tax will actually put a far greater burden on the poor. Even in Gauteng, if we fund it via the fuel tax, the taxi drivers will be paying more. At present, the taxi drivers will not be paying.
Yeah.
They are exempt. So the system of paying via tolling is actually designed in many different ways to favour the lower income groups. What OUTA is doing is advocating a system. I agree it's costly, and I accept
Massively costly.
It's costly, and it's perhaps not the most efficient, but it's the most socially equitable method, because only 20% of Gauteng households are car users.
Yeah.
They do contribute more to the economy than others, but the other 80% must be the ones, and they in fact are the ones who in national transport policy determine the way in which we fund our infrastructure. We must, according to the National Land Transport Act, fund our infrastructure in a manner which levels the playing field towards the lower income groups who use public transport.
But you see, this is why the user pays mechanism of a fuel levy. You know, this notion that why do other people in George, for instance, pay towards our roads here? Gauteng puts in 40% into the national coffers. Of its road users, the user pay mechanism, I start my car, I use the road, I drive, and I'm paying towards the fuel levy. 44 billion rand a year goes into that. This is less than 2 billion rand, or less than 0.2% of national fiscus. It actually doesn't make sense that you now need to put in place this massive infrastructure which says, by the way, guys, before 1 rand goes into the tarmac, we just need 1.3 billion rand. I mean, you know how many houses and extra roads and schools you could build with that? So you talk about social equity. This is massively unjust.
Let's talk about benefits, though. Gibbs did a cost-benefit analysis on the side with PwC, and they say that for every 1 rand spent by the motorist in Gauteng, they will get 10 rands of benefit in time saved, safety and wear and tear. What do you say to that?
But you're missing the point. No one's saying...
No, not missing the point. We're talking about the benefits.
So what you're saying is I must pay to have more time. I pay anyway.
We want world-class infrastructure in our country. We want to lead the African Renaissance. That's where South Africa as a country should be.
We're with you.
Infrastructure, especially transport infrastructure, is what drives economic activity.
Exactly.
So we have to look at it holistically and not politicize it too much.
So how have we paid for the 4-lane highway from Mabeni to Umhlanga Rocks in Durban? It's not told. How have we paid for all this other infrastructure?
Government's priorities have changed. We have to look at that now.
Okay.
If you want world-class infrastructure, you have to find a way to pay for that. Right now, government could not afford to pay for these toll roads.
Okay, so we've got a world-class airline. Who's paying for that? It's not a user pays mechanism. What you have in this country is this inconsistency. Gautrain is not making money. Another 700 million needs to be put in there. What you say is raise the prices for the user pays.
I don't want to argue with you, but you're using examples like the Gautrain.
Well,
before the Gautrain was launched, right, it was accepted that it would not make money and that government would support that, because for the same principle, in order to drive the economic hub of your nation, you have to invest in transport infrastructure. It's a simple thing.
We understand that. So the presidential review a commission that reviews state-owned entities, they themselves in recommendation number 21 said, because this is not the long-distance road that you and I take occasionally to get to Durban on holiday. This is social infrastructure, the infrastructure you and I take to get to work and back to earn our salaries, to pay our taxes, to go to school, to go to church, to go to sport. Social infrastructure should rely more on taxation and less on a user pays mechanism. It's not like water and lights. It's crazy.
Mr. Maze, could you respond to that?
Yes, social infrastructure, especially for the lower income group, should be funded by the government. The reason that we're funding, from a policy perspective, the reason we're funding the roads by tolls is precisely for that reason. We want to tilt the playing field away from the relatively privileged group of motorists in Gauteng towards the relatively less privileged 80% who have no access to a car.
So you're saying the poor don't drive on the roads? Because you've got to answer to those people as well.
There are 20%, less than 20% of households in Gauteng have access to a car. 80% don't. So whilst there is a small proportion within the motorway users who are lower income, relatively speaking, freeway users are at the upper end of the social scale. We must find a way of tolling the road, of paying for the roads in a way which makes it easier for public transport to succeed. One of the reasons why public transport does not work well in South Africa is because roads are free at the point of use. Yes, we're paying by fuel tax, I agree.
Massively.
But because roads are free and easy to use, people are migrating away from public transport. So
with no public transport as the alternative now, how do you get me? Because I would take 2 buses to work. If they were there, from east to west, there's nothing there.
I'll answer that. Public transport is not ideal in South Africa. It's actually, in some respects, getting worse. But one of the reasons it's getting worse is because our roads are so good and we continue to fund them in a manner which is free at the point of use. If we don't get a grip on that and come up with an integrated transport planning policy that tilts the playing field back towards the 80% of non-car users, then we will continue to fund our roads in a manner which favours the well-off.
Yeah, so what I heard Bruce Benga say, and this is quite an interesting discussion, maybe we shouldn't have put the money in Gautrain, maybe we shouldn't have put the money in the roads. We never had the opportunity to discuss this. Maybe an integrated public transport system to give me options and do a light upgrade on the roads would have moved to exactly what you're talking about.
Hindsight is an exact science, always.
Yeah.
How do we make it work for South Africa from here on, and how do you see it work for South Africa from here on forward? You've lost your court battles. It shows that e-tolling is a lawful system by the South African law.
Well, we can challenge that, by the way. We can challenge that. Do you know that you see this?
You've done that several times.
You see, you're missing the point.
I'm not missing the point. We can't live in hindsight. We have to move forward as a nation now.
I understand that. And believe you me, we're patriotic citizens and want what's best for this country. We're not doing this because we want to pick a fight with government or because we've got nothing to do. This is massively unjust. Okay, so what we want to do is, and understand the court process.
On what grounds? Because legally it says it's a lawful system.
But if you want to,
and it's passed through the court.
In apartheid, they put in laws and said that's the law. So now
we're not under apartheid.
Okay, but
we live in a 21st century country that wants to be the economic hub, not just of this country, of an entire continent. So we have to sort of. We have to keep our eye on the ball, as it were.
Let me just explain the court process first. All right. I understand this, that the Supreme Court of Appeal set aside our case on a technicality. Okay, the time it took. They said expressly in there, the lawfulness issues, the way that Sanral conducted themselves still has to be tested in court. Do you sit back and just ignore that? Or
so are you telling South Africans now to disobey the law and not buy ETAs, and from tomorrow be within breach of the law? Is that your message
What we're
today?
saying to South Africans, if you feel like you need to buy an ETAG and you do so under duress, and go and ask the people in the queues, go and ask Business South Africa, SACI, go and ask the unions, go and ask the churches, they're all on the same page on this matter. It's under duress that you buy this tag. But if you want to make the system cumbersome and unworkable, don't get an e-tag. Don't get an e-tag and pay the higher price and make the manual process kick in. And then you get those who say, I'm exercising my legal rights because we believe that it's not a lawful process. You can put something into law and just say, well, that's the law. But you can challenge that because we believe that the process has been introduced unlawfully. And that will be heard the minute someone is summoned to court for non-payment.
It's been tested, and
we
can argue the merits of that.
The lawfulness hasn't been tested, by the way. That's very important that you know that.
Mr. Mazi, please respond to that. I want to talk a little bit more about the fact that this was not a surprise to motorists. Yeah. In order for Sanral to, firstly, to get the loans, to secure the funding, to build this, they had to have a mechanism in place that they could prove would be the funding model. And this was the case, wasn't it?
I want to just mention at this point that there's some areas in which I agree with Wayne, and that is that funding via government is technically more efficient. It leads to a higher benefit to cost ratio. On financial and economic efficiency grounds, tolling is not the optimum. It's suboptimum, but it's not inefficient. It still has a very high benefit to cost ratio.
Yeah.
From a transport policy point of view, the case for tolling is nothing to do with funding. It's got everything to do with integrated transport planning. Now, the way forward from this situation is to actually, for Sanral, in my opinion, to go to the Gauteng province and say, listen, how can we integrate this? We realize that the e-tolling system is not the same as the N3 intercity tolling system.
Exactly.
It's really a public transport network. We need to find ways of actually acknowledging the fact that by tolling the roads, we are seeking to improve public transport.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, investment in public transport is occurring. Lucky Montano of Prasa is trying to secure 100 billion rands for new trains. Gautrain has gone ahead. BRTs are going ahead, but these will struggle to succeed if roads are free at the point of use. But the public will not accept this unless they can actually see this integration between paying a bit more for the roads for the higher income people in order to make it easier for a better public transport system.
And Andrew, you're knocking the nail on the head. And this is the solution. We can make this work in time, but we need to go back and we need to work with the stakeholders to find the most equitable solution. What has happened is they put the cart before the horse and they've rushed ahead, building a Rolls Royce of a road upgrade, which was probably not necessary, and we've overpaid, acknowledge that. And nobody's going to go and collect the money, by the way, from the damn construction companies that overcharged us. So had we have the public transport in place, I can assure you that people would have been able to move on to that, and those who wanted to use the roads pay for it. But they've done it wrong, and they've not consulted, so now they have the backlash.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it also looks like we've run out of time because the deadline is tonight, and the public will be in breach of the law if they don't have an e-tag. But thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's a discussion that I think we'll have, we'll further in the weeks and months to come as we develop it. It's, of course, Wayne Duvenage from OUTA and Andrew Mazi, who's a transport consultant. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.